Here she comes. Take your time.
The gravitas of the entrance.
Good evening and welcome to the March 21, 2023 regular meeting of the Township Board for the Charter Township of Meridian. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Lamaster, could we have a roll call vote?
Supervisor
A
Jackson.
roll call, I'm sorry.
Supervisor Jackson.
Here.
Clerk Guthrie.
Here.
Treasurer DeShane. Here. Trustee Hendrickson. Here. Trustee Sundland. Here. Trustee Wilson.
Here.
Trustee Wazinski.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Tonight, we have three presentations. The first is from Mr. Brad Brogan, representing Friends of Historic Meridian. Mr. Brogan, would you come to the podium?
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. It was 50 years ago that township officials, as yourself, and community members visioned saving some historic structures in this beautiful township. The first building to move over was the Grettenberger Farmhouse, located where the Pilgrim House barn is now, the farmstead, followed by the Tollgate House, and then the remaining 7 buildings. We have, we had 8 historic structures in the village. In 1991, the I Development Company donated the Unruh family barn, which is located across Marsh Road. The silo still sits there on the farmstead, and it was moved in its entirety, put on a new foundation in the historic village. A landscape architect that worked with the township 50 years ago devised the first plan for Central Park to include the historic structures. 2 years later, a year later, the Friends of Historic Meridian were incorporated to operate the historic village. And I share with you tonight applications of membership, if you're not already a member in our group. I know a few of you are, and we appreciate your support. I put in an application for Barn of the Year to the Michigan Barn Preservation Network earlier this year, fully realizing that the barn itself is by no means unique. There's plenty of barns around that are probably in better shape than that one. But what is unique is how the community is using the structure and the village itself. Pre-pandemic, we were bringing close to 3,000 school children a year through the village to learn pioneer living skills. And in the barn, they would run the corn sheller, shell corn, or in a small grinder to make cornmeal. And it's amazing how kids loved doing manual labor in a barn. And many of them had not been in a barn before. And to see the timber frame construction, the mortise and tendon joints put together with wooden pegs, it's truly amazing. Notification to receive the award came through me, and I contacted Lou Ann at the Parks and Recs Department. She was aware of the application, and she offered to come to the awards luncheon, which is the Kellogg Center, a couple weeks ago. However, due to the weather, there was quite a snowstorm the night before. There was a home basketball game that made parking miserable. She declined to the invitation to get over there. Fortunately, Deborah Guthrie was in the audience, and little did I know that Deborah belongs to the Michigan Barn Preservation Network. So I asked her if she would come forward with me to receive the award. Of course, she had no idea that we were getting it. In fact, the award is given to the township. And it says Michigan Barn Preservation Network, Barn of the Year 2023, Nonprofit Adaptive Use. This is the category that was put forth for this. Meridian Charter Township, the Unruh Barn. So I'm hoping the township has a place, perhaps in the town hall room here, where they could display this. We have a larger sign that we are going to put out on the barn itself, and let the public know of the structure that we have and the use for it. Unfortunately, there are problems with that barn, and the photographs that I submitted did not depict the skirt boards that are rotting, the holes in the siding, the loose boards, holes in the roof. It looks really good from a distance. And as such, we know that there has to be a lot of work done. And Luann realizes that also, and they sent out bids for a historic architect to come through and evaluate all 8 of our historic structures. And I don't know how aware the board is of that. That report just came out, and it shows a lot of work has to be done. Some very high priority issues, roofs in particular. If you look over at the Grettenberger farmhouse now, that's the second building next to the barn, you'll notice tarps on the roof. This is the second time we've had to put tarps on that roof. We did it last year and replaced a portion of the roof. Now the whole roof has to be replaced. And it's doubtful we'll be able to use cedar shakes, which are on it now. The architect is recommending simple asphalt shingles. Maybe we can go with something metal. That remains to be seen, but we're going to work on that. And I think it's imperative that the township board be made aware of these needs. I met with the Parks Commission last week, presented this award also, and they're aware of these needs. So we're going to be working in the near future to determine our direction to make these corrections. Along with the building, the roof of the barn, the Grettenberger farmhouse, the Barnes house also needs a roof replacement. That's where the addition was put on for our office. Unfortunately, we didn't re-roof the original part of the house, and that's in dire need of that work. So with that, I'd like to present this award to Supervisor Jackson.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I hope you'll share our congratulations with the Friends of Historic Meridian as well, and thanks. Our next presentation will be led by Police Chief Plaga.
Madam Supervisor, board members, it's my pleasure to introduce the Director of the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police, Bob Stevenson, and the Deputy Director, Ron Wiles. Bob?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Township Supervisor, trustees, township officials, and probably most importantly, the residents of Meridian Township. My name is Bob Stevenson, currently the Executive Director with the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police. In my prior career, I spent 37 years in the city of Livonia, and last 7 as chief, and then 11 years ago took over in this position. I'm here tonight representing the Michigan Law Enforcement Commission as we award a certificate of reaccreditation to the Meridian Township Police Department. It seems like just yesterday, but it was really 3 years ago that I was here when you attained your original accreditation. And the accomplishment is no less impressive today, and maybe more so, than it was 3 years ago. I would again point out that in the state of Michigan, there's some 600 police agencies, and of those 600 police agencies, just less than 400 are municipal agencies. Another 83 are county, and then the rest are colleges and hospitals and tribal agencies. But out of all the agencies in the state of Michigan, your police department, the Meridian Township Police Department, is the 17th police department in the whole state of Michigan to attain reaccreditation. And put that in another flavor, if you will, your police department has done what over 96% of the other police departments in the state of Michigan have not done. There is no doubt that the last few years have been challenging for law enforcement. And we've had some high-profile incidents of some very bad conduct by basically criminals dressed in blue, and there's been a lot of fallout from that, and part of the fallout was a call for a lot of so-called police reform. I would hope that the citizens of Meridian Township would take comfort in knowing that every single one of the police reforms that are called for throughout the country, your police department had already implemented because of the accreditation program. They were way ahead of the curve before it was called for. They did it not because they were told to, they did it because they wanted to excel and to stay right at the top. And it's a tremendous professional accomplishment. As the executive director of the Association of Chiefs of Police, I'm proud of this agency. I use them as a mantle to show other agencies what can be done around the state of Michigan. So with that, I want to introduce our program director, Ron Wiles, our deputy director also with the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police, to talk a little bit about the process. Ron?
Thank you. Well, good evening, and thank you for allowing us to be here. It is certainly my privilege to be here and celebrate your exceptional police department. You know, accreditation is a journey. It is not a destination. There is always things to do when you're an accredited police department. 3 years ago, your agency made a promise. They made a promise to you, they made a promise to their department members, and they made a promise to the citizens of Meridian Township. I'm here to tell you today that they kept that promise. 3 years later, they kept that promise. Let me run you through the process. So 3 years ago, when they were in search of their original accreditation, they went through several steps. They went through 2 years of a self-analysis period where they were looking at their current written directives, made sure they complied with our 108 best practice standards. They had people come into the police department and look at that standards and mock assessments to make sure they're on the right track. We sent in a team of assessors from outside the area to take a final look at their standards to make sure they were compliant with the written directives of this police department. Now, I say 108 standards, which sounds a big number by itself, but inside those 108 standards, there are several other bullet points. So really, they're doing over 800 tasks to try to achieve accreditation. And ultimately, that ended with them going before the MELIAC Commission and getting honored with their initial accreditation. Now, they have a 2-year period to do that, as I mentioned. When you're doing reaccreditation, you have to do all that every year for 3 straight years. And at the end of that 3-year period, we again send in a team of outside assessors to take a deep dive into those written directives and make sure you're compliant with the standards of our program. And I'm very proud to tell you that they are certainly compliant with those standards. You should be very proud. The residents of Meridian Township should be very proud, and the police department should be very proud for what they accomplished. As Director Stevenson said, only 20 agencies in the state of Michigan have accomplished what they've done, and they were number 17 to do it. So with that, I will turn it back over to Executive Director Stevenson for the presentation.
Thank you, Ron. Chief, if we could. To all who see the certificate, know that the Meridian Township Police Department, having voluntarily complied with the standards established by the Michigan Law Enforcement Accreditation Commission, deemed essential for the delivery of professional police services and the protection of their community, is hereby awarded the Certificate of Accreditation effective the first day of March in the year 2023 for a team of 3 years. Congratulations, Chief. Thank you, sir.
I'd love to stand up here and tell you that I did it all on my own. Not the case. Captain Rick Grillo, our accreditation manager, Sergeant Kurt Squires, his assistant accreditation manager, officers throughout the department on every shift, making sure that we're following the standards set forth by the commission and we're meeting what we need to meet to become an accredited agency. I want to say a special thank you to both the executive director and deputy director for coming tonight. This is not standard. Unfortunately, we were to be awarded our accreditation at the winter conference in Grand Rapids. But that was also the same day as the incident at Okemos High School. So as I turned around, I called the director and the executive director, and they were gracious enough to come to the Township Board and present this award, which I'm very proud of, but I'm very proud of our people because they're the ones who achieved it. So thank you very much, board members.
Thank you.
All right, nice job.
And thank you, gentlemen, for coming tonight.
It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure entirely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda will be a presentation by Chief Hamill
And Chief Plaga, he's going to start it.
and Chief Plaga. And this is a presentation this board has asked for in response to many residents in our township who have asked questions about this information and are anxious to see what you have to tell us.
Well, railway incidents are on the front of everybody's mind after the incident in Ohio. I'm going to start this discussion or this presentation because realistically, law enforcement has an integral part, but it is not the most technical part of a response. As law enforcement agencies, we have plans in place. I want to reiterate, one of the most important things anybody can do is go out and sign up for the Ingham County Emergency Alert System. That's the alert system that hits your cell phones, your text messages, your emails, so that if there is an incident and we need to evacuate folks, that's how we can get a hold of you and be certain to get a hold of you. That's law enforcement's number one priority, is to make the scene safe. We don't have any work inside that zone, but we're going to conduct evacuations of areas depending on what type of incident it is. If it's a minor incident, it may not require an evacuation, just notification. But as the fire chief will get into, it could take a large-scale evacuation dependent on the situation and how quickly we can get that done by notifying residents, either using the alert notification system, also going door to door. But we have those plans in place so that we can make that a quick and effective notification, because getting people out of the affected area is going to be our number one priority. Once us as law enforcement has completed that evacuation, we're then going to a defensive mode where we do scene security. We're going to set up perimeters. We're going to ask our neighbors for assistance because our resources will be overwhelmed by a large-scale incident to try and control access to a situation. Curious people, media, others will try to get in to see what they can see. Well, it's an unsafe situation, so we'll be using our law enforcement partners to make sure that we keep that scene secure. And we're talking, it could be a radius of a mile and a half. So a very big task, but we are prepared to do that. We have plans in place with our neighboring agencies to conduct that. Where the real heavy lift comes in is where I will turn it over to my friend, the fire chief, and let him explain to you why they call us Blue Canaries.
I never, that's not in this.
I know.
Thanks, Chief. Well, that's a good one. So Blue Canary, Madam Supervisor and Board, is we call that copology. So when we go to a hazmat incident and we see a cop laying there, we know they were too close. And they got something they should have, and they passed out. But we don't do that anymore. We've come a long way in the last 30 years in regards to hazardous materials response. So thank you for requesting this. I think it's a important thing, especially based on the fact that we have 2 railroad tracks that run through our community and divide us in 3, which I'm going to cover. Really every situation is going to be different. But I do have some railroad history I want to go over so we kind of have an idea how safe railroads really are. How safe are the trains? So if you look at this first slide, you see there's a lot to hazardous materials, a lot of training comes into it. We have partnerships with 5 different departments in the metro area. So it's our Metro Hazmat team, which we do a lot of training in regards to wearing a level A suit, plugging and patching, and you can see in the middle left slide where they're actually covering a hole in a tank. No fire conditions, not a hard thing. Palestine was a little bit different, it had fire conditions, so I'm gonna try to relate it to that as we go through this. So there's average of 3 railcar accidents in the United States a day, about 1,100 annually. That's not very many. Pretty good odds. It's about 99.9% of the cargo that's being transported by train gets to where it needs to go. It's that 0.1% like a Palestine. One of the things I really want you to be aware of in regards to where they've come in the railroad industry is you can see there's been a 44% decrease since 2000 in derailments. A lot of technology. It's kind of like airlines. They started really checking their engines a little closer from back in the 60s and 70s when we had a lot more crashes. So a lot more requirements there. And you go back to 1978, there were over 8,000 derailments. But what's a derailment? A car gets over the tracks, the train hits them, that's a derailment. A suicide, that's a derailment. Those are all considered derailments. Doesn't have to be a wheel off the tracks. Some of the most common, though, you can see half of the accidents occur in unprotected crossings. So those are a lot of rural areas where they don't have lights and gates. And some interesting statistics that I was able to find, believe it or not, there's only 209,000 railroad crossings in the United States. Seems a little low, but that's the statistics I found. So there's about 600 railroads, companies. So there's a tremendous amount of product being transported as well as passengers. So some of the derailments, speedy trains, we see those in a lot of other countries, or passenger trains that accelerate around corners too fast. We've seen those in the news in the last 20 years. Human error, train tracks that have actually cracked or broken, debris on the tracks can cause a derailment, just a number of things. So we know here in the township we have 2. We have the CN, that's our north track, and then we have CSX, which is our southern track. CN is a really busy track. That's really near our service center, and goes through East Lansing and that whole area. Actually, they both do. But if you, the statistics I put on this are wrong. So the CN is actually 15 a day, roughly. We got that confirmed today, with 2 passenger trains a day. The other one is 5 to 6 trains a day. Still a tremendous amount of trains that we have daily going through our township that have all kinds of product, from grain to cars to wood to chemicals. So if you go back to Palestine, Palestine only had 11 cars that had chemicals out of that whole train. Mostly vegetable oil, cargo of some sort. The list goes on vegetables. So trains are not predominantly made up of chemical cars, but we're going to talk about the different types of cars that are out there and what the effect can be. So we can look at either liquids or compressed gas, and again, these can be under pressure or non-pressurized, but under fire conditions, they become pressurized, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So generally, and if you look at this, this is a placarding system, one of them that's used, not just in trains, but on barrels, on trucks that are driving through communities. So we use these a lot to try to determine what is the substance we're dealing with. The other thing that trains have, you can see this one, it has actually a name of a chemical on it. Others just have numbers. And these are the 3 ways we can actually try to identify what the chemical is, which is important as we move forward. I'll tell you what happens. And again, depending on the chemical, it could be, if we do have a fire hazard, could it be explosive or could it be just a fire, and what causes that? So there's different tank cars, and the one on the top left, you can see that's what we call a pressurized tank car. And you can tell because it has the area of confinement on top with the rails, and then there's a top over top of the filling mechanisms and the gauges and stuff like that. But you could also have non-pressurized that look similar. And some of it is the shape of the car too. A flat end generally is not pressurized, a round as is. And then the middle is like a grain, or it could be some type of other liquid that's non-combustible or non-explosive and hazardous, things like that. And then you can have cars that just carry coal. You've probably all seen them. Cement. There's just a whole list of what these trains carry. The box cars and things like that. So, what causes a fire, what causes an explosion, what causes a toxic exposure from a train event. So if you look at Palestine, they had a spill that had some type of spark or ignition source, whether it was from the issue with the train where they had the kind of the braking mechanisms, the bearings that were overheated. They have not determined that that was actually the true cause of the derailment, but that was noticed just prior to the derailment. It was a first notification, but it wasn't a notification enough to make them stop. So when a train derails like that and you have a chemical that spills, that can be ignited by some type of spark, or what causes an explosion down the way is if we have a fire like Palestine and you have these superheated, these tanks are becoming superheated with it's like a pot on your stove. If you put a top on, it's boiling. It kind of jitters because all that pressure building up from the gas escaping from the liquid, the vapor. So what happens in these tank cars is they fill up to a point where that pressure is so bad it blows up. It's called a BLEVE, a boiling liquid evaporation explosion. And so what we would do in something like that, if it's not the liquid already venting, we would actually try to get big water monitors and cool it to try to keep it from exploding. What they did in Palestine with some of the tanks that weren't under fire condition is they released the product by somehow either a valve or they cut a hole in it, I don't know which, and they put them into a diked area and then they tried to get it out of there because they were worried that it might heat up and explode. So there's still a lot more information that'll come out on that. And then the biggest thing is the toxic exposure. Depending on the chemical, let's say chlorine, if you have a chlorine tank, you're gonna have a plume in the air, it's gonna be a visible plume, and that's not good. That causes a lot of environmental issues. It could cause problems to residents. It could cause problems to us. So those are things we have to recognize based on wind conditions, hot or cold out. We always enter uphill, upwind, and upstream from an event to protect us. And again, depending on the situation, we may have to be back 2,000, 3,000 feet. And then depending on, again, is it a toxic environment, is it an explosive environment, on how far we would potentially evacuate. So when we get to this point, we would have to make a determination of, do we shelter in place? Do we evacuate? And again, it depends on what the situation is. They had to in Palestine because they had a lot of fire, they had a lot of smoke, and a lot of chemicals that are in the air. If we just have a small leak here, we may be able to plug and patch it depending on what the chemical is, where we would maybe evacuate the closest area just because if the chemical leak gets worse, or if there's a potential for fire conditions, we want to get ahead of that sooner than later. But those are the ideal ones where those are easy. We've had those. That's not uncommon. We've had train derailment in Lansing in the early 90s where it was a pressurized tank car that just went on its side. No big deal, just crossed the tracks for 3 days because we had to wait for a big crane to move it. So those are the ideal ones. It's when you have like a Palestine where you have a lot of things going on. And our number one choice at that time is protect our citizens. Mm-hmm. So think about up here, if we had to evacuate, we wouldn't be here today. North and South Fire Station wouldn't be here, the police station wouldn't be here. Big change in the way we operate for a few days, plus all the evacuation of people. So every situation is going to be different and bring a different environment of what we're going to have to do to manage it. Again, the materials are important. What's leaking? Is there a risk to fire? And then, what's the exposure from the chemicals? And can we stop the release, whether it's a valve or is it a hole in it? And we have equipment that can plug and patch or even cover valves to stop them from leaking. Quick thing on notification. I didn't want to leave this out because this is important, and Chief Plaga hit it really well. We are the top in the county for the number of people that are on Everbridge. Prior to the last time we had this conversation, we had about 8,000, and I think we're up to about 10,000. And that's really, we've done really well, but we've got a lot more residents that we'd like to get on it. So that's my plug for that. So if we had to notify people, we would send out an Everbridge. We would also talk to our dispatch, who would send out some information. We'd hit the news media. Communications would play an important role. We'd get with the state of Michigan, Ingham County Emergency Management, and we would go door to door like Chief Palaga said. And it would be a tremendous feat to, again, health safety first, how are we going to evacuate and how rapidly, and then we have to have the right direction knowing we're away from where the product is going. This is just a map of an evacuation zone if we had to do one. Again, it's based on the situation, but it shows, and this is where the tracks come together, I believe, in near Hagedorn. They're somewhat close together between Mount Hope and campus. And again, how we determine evacuation is, number one, we try to figure out the chemical. So I told you that we could look at a plaque card, if there a name on the tank car, or is there a number? And then what we have, what we call the emergency response guidebook. We carry them in our glove boxes, police carry them in their glove boxes. And it's there's 3 sections. One's based on those 3 criteria I gave you, number or chemical. And then we go to the back where it tells us to go, and it tells us the initial evacuation zone based on fire conditions or not. And that's what we, in the beginning, would base it on. After that, we base it on potentially air monitoring. We would have lots of mutual aid for that, to go neighborhood to neighborhood of areas we think it's going and see actually how far it's extended. We could be into East Lansing if you have something like Palestine where the wind's blowing that direction. So it could get worse instead of better in regards to evacuation areas. So that's kind of how we do it. And again, it's somewhat weather-based. Cold days are great. People worry about a ignition source at a gas station. I don't worry about it in the winter. It's not going to happen. Takes a lot more heat than that to ignite a gas pump or gas in general. So that's how we kind of progress through the incident, though, is air monitoring and what's the event actually doing. So our local response, as Chief Blaga said, it would start with the 2 of us. We would come up with a plan, and it would be based on the situation if we had to start evacuating rapidly, and get that notification out the best we can. But we'd also call in our resources right away. En route, we would call for the Metro Hazmat team. Once we got there, if we knew it was a big enough event, we can reach out to our statewide resource, which is about 65 counties around what we call Michigan MABUS, it's Mutual Aid Box Alarm System. Most fire departments in Michigan are contracted with them. We make a phone call to the Red Center, which is Ann Arbor, through HVA, and we say, I need a task force of 3 different hazmat teams, and they get them to us. It might take an hour or 2, but the resources are there. We would also notify the state of Michigan through the Michigan State Police, because potentially there's state and federal resources that they could bring in for hazardous materials. The train companies would be coming. They have teams for this. They would be not the authority, but the people with the knowledge and understanding. One of the ways we can also determine a chemical in a vehicle, and I wanted to step back to this because I forgot, is we have an app on our phone, our battalion chief has, where I could pull up a train going through Meridian Township right now and tell you what's in every car. That's something that's come a long way with the rail industry, as well as even the shipping papers that the engineer would have that we would try to get to, depending on if they're good or not. So there's other ways to get what's on that train. But we would literally, we would call everybody, honestly. Every federal resource, every state resource would be involved in a similar as Ohio, just because of the amount of environmental issues and things like that. And we would have to get ahead of it. And I will be honest with you, if we had an Ohio here, it'd be a mess. There's no way around it. That's huge. It was a big incident. Minor incidents are not as hard. That would be a huge undertaking, as you've seen in the paper. And whether they made mistakes there or not, I don't know. But it would be a mess. There's no way around it. So how do we prevent accidents? This is more for the community. Don't raise tracks. I believe long before I was here, Ken, or Chief, you were probably here when the kids raised the gates and on Hagedorn and were killed. People do that. Make sure you stop at a track before you cross. Things like that. Don't try to beat a train. And again, a lot of that's more rural because we have a lot of crossings here. So, and, you know, during construction times, you can see people get stuck on the tracks. During heavy traffic times on Okemos Road, people are on the track because of traffic, especially down by Delta Dental. There's a lot of traffic. So it's things like that that we want to be aware of. Stop short of the tracks. Don't stop on the tracks. That car in front of you may not be moving. So there's things that we can do as a community to try to protect ourselves. Don't put things on the track. Don't try to destroy the track. And that's really all I have.
Thank you. Board members, do you have questions, comments? Clerk Guthrie.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. Is this something that your department's currently trained for? Is this part of the training?
Yeah, we have, I think, a handful of hazmat technicians, so there's different levels of training, awareness, operations, and technician. We have everybody's operations in our department, awareness and operations. So what an operations person can do is really defensive, which would be small leaks we can dike and block from going like into the drains or into rivers. For something really big with hazmat techs who wear the level A suits, like in the first slide, we only have about a handful, but in the metro area, we've got about 40 people trained. And then we actually have some people trained in the chemistry level where we can actually take a product and try to determine what it is or what family it's in to see how bad it is. So yes.
Then I had one other question,
Continue.
but it's for Deputy Township Manager Dan Hopsimer. Last year, the board approved some safety crossings at some of the railroad tracks. Is that, I can't remember if that was in the budget or not, if we're still moving forward with that portion.
So what we were discussing at that time was the railroad quiet zone, and then we ran into the issue where initially going into that, our understanding was that positive train control technology, which was installed on the CN railroad line, but not the CSX line, that's a federal requirement. So the federal rules and laws changed and required positive train control to be installed. And so that did occur on the CN line. What we did not know at that time was that there are 5 different types of circuits that can be installed at a crossing, and it can still be deemed PTC compliant or positive train control compliant. 2 of our 3 do not have that specific circuitry that we need for the railroad quiet zone. But to your question, that's kind of the broader picture. But to your question about safety at the crossings, when we were exploring doing a railroad quiet zone, we were going to install the Z gates. So it makes pedestrians and bicyclists stop and be more alert when they cross, because we're not going to have those horns going off. So we have put the pause button on the Z gates because we don't see the need if we are not implementing the quiet zone. But essentially you see those on campus. If you're coming to and from the commuter lot on a tailgate Saturday or something like that, you see the Z gates on the approaches to both sides of the railroad crossing. So it makes you do kind of a little carousel, gets you to pick your eyes up and look at the railroad crossing. Campus did have one unfortunate incident where someone was wearing headphones and walked into an oncoming train. So a similar circumstance to what a railroad quiet zone would present, but there the horn was blaring, but they had headphones on. So there are things that we can do at railroad crossings to improve safety in that regard. But there are pros and cons. Certainly the bicycle community would say that they don't want to get off for Z gates. That was certainly going to be one downside or con to doing the railroad quiet zone, was the impact on bicyclists for the crossing.
So when you say put on pause, the Z gates weren't part of the 2024 budget?
They are in the budget, but we were going to put a pause on actually implementing those because we do not have the ability to implement the railroad quiet zone without addressing the circuitry issue, which was much more costly. My recollection was when we put that before the board in December for the ARP discussion,
Correct.
it was about $500,000 to $700,000 total to do 2 crossings. So
With the
about,
circuitry,
Yep.
not the Z gates.
correct. The Z gates were roughly about 40 to 50,000 for just the 3 crossings at, actually, that was also going to include the east side of Hagedorn Road, and we still probably will implement Z gates on the east side of Hagedorn Road because Campus and the city of East Lansing have implemented it on the west side of Hagedorn Road. So we probably will just make that crossing uniform on the east and west side of Hagedorn.
Thank you for refreshing my memory. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, anytime.
Treasurer DeShane.
Thank you, Chief, for the information about derailments, and they are relatively rare. I think many people's concern is that railroads have learned how to maximize their profit, which is to run these trains that are longer and longer, sometimes a kilometer, up to 8 kilometers long, these trains will go. And that's with like 1 or 2 people on the entire train. And East Palestine, of course, was an overheated wheel that their sensors didn't catch. So it's the trend I think we're worried about. The railroads are running these very long trains with almost no people on board. And if the sensors are bad, there's no one there to check the potential fire hazard. But anyway, this is good information. I'm glad you brought it to the township residents.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, gentlemen, very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
We move on to item 5 on our agenda. This is one point in our agenda where citizens address agenda items and non-agenda items. We ask that if you wish to speak to the board and the assembly at this point or the item 14 on our agenda, that you fill out one of the green cards found on the desk as you enter the door, and we will call on you for your comments. Is there anyone who would like to speak to the township board at this point? Seeing none, we move on to item 6 on our agenda, which is the township manager's report. And in Mr. Walsh's absence, I believe Assistant Manager Opsimer will present that.
Good evening, board members and Supervisor Jackson. Thank you. Manager Welsh is away on vacation and sends his regards this evening. So I'll give you a couple of updates on projects, much of which I touched on over the weekend with you, but it is Severe Weather Awareness Week, and we will be installing, as we have been, 1 siren per year. We will be installing another siren on Van Atta Road, just south of Grand River Avenue, sometime over the next week or 2. We will have 3 sirens to go, and then we will have full coverage of the township's geographic limits. So 3 more years, and we should be done with this program, which commenced when Manager Welsh arrived. St. Patrick's Day. So we did have a relatively calm St. Patrick's Day. We thank our residents for celebrating responsibly and respectably. Chip and fog road treatment response and the upcoming community meeting. So I'm going to take a moment on this one because it's kind of a complex subject matter, but we did have a little under 8 miles of roads that were treated with what's known as a chip and fog treatment. So this is not an asphalt product that goes on the road. This is an asphalt emulsion that is spread over the surface of the road, and then a stone, which is what we mean when we say chip, is spread onto the surface and it embeds in that emulsion. And so it's a preventative maintenance treatment that we use on roads that are in good condition, not excellent condition. It extends the life of the road. However, there are some drawbacks. These were roads that were selected in the 2021 and the 2022 local road program. The construction occurred in the 2022 calendar year. We're really starting to see some of the cons to this treatment with the snow plows. We've had a mild winter, so we've had very few trips we've had very few instances where the plows have actually been on the road. But a lot of stone has come loose. We commenced our first round of street sweeping. Old English Estates is done, and we will keep sweeping through the first round when we have weather that allows for it until we complete all 8 miles of roads. We will have a community meeting on Thursday, April 6th in this room at 6 p.m. So approximately 1,660 homeowners or property owners that live on or nearby the roads that were treated received that mailing and were invited, and we have communications out on social media and the website as well. We are discussing options internally and looking at what we could do with possible overlays, and we'll be having more discussions, and we'll be looking to listen and take that listening session back and finish exploring those options and decide which course we will take this year. But we are working diligently to correct that, and the decision was also made many, many months ago to no longer pursue that treatment in the future. So that was a decision that was made a long time ago. But March Board of Review, another difficult subject. So state law and the state constitution. Voters approved Proposal A in 1994. They approved Proposal A for a very specific reason, and that reason is that taxable values and property taxes were increasing at very astronomical rates. So today, if we did not have Proposal A, we saw the housing market get very hot in 2022. And property taxes prior to Proposal A passing in 1994 would have increased proportionate to the market value of homes, which would have been staggering. With Proposal A, we cap it at the rate of inflation. For the first time in the history of Proposal A, the state set the inflationary rate at the constitutional max of 5%. So therefore, for the first time ever, we have residents experiencing 5% increases in their property taxes, not including any millage increases that could have come from regional entities. The township did not have any millage increases from 22 to 23. But the assessing team, Assessor Winstead and her team, have been very busy during the March Board of Review, much busier than usual because we are not experiencing the normal 1 to 2% inflationary rate that the state sets. We've never even come close to the 5%. But prior to Proposal A passing in 1994, this was fairly common. And that was the frustration that led to this. Juneteenth events, we will be announcing Juneteenth events that Director Clark has been working on for many months later this week. We do not have that information up on the website just yet, but there's actually going to be 3 to 4 different nights of events. There's going to be a movie night in the park in Lake Lansing South, and many other different events that the community can partake in. The Township Welcome and Wayfinding Sign Project. Obviously, our first sign was finally installed at the Marketplace on the Green, and we had our first message up on the LED board for the market on Saturday. So many more signs like this will be going up, 2 here in the complex, 1 with an LED board, 1 without an LED board, and then we will have the 4 welcome signs into the entrances of our community going up very soon as well. So we look forward to seeing the remaining signs go up in the community. The 2023 municipal building renovation project, we actually began construction on the lobby of the service center. We either completed that work today or are very close, at least on the wall repairs, ceiling repairs, and the painting. Flooring will come in a few weeks, and we will wrap up the service center lobby with the flooring. Actually, I should pause for a minute. We will also be redoing the front counter as well. We do not have a timeline on the front counter work, but we should have walls and flooring in here in several weeks once the flooring comes in. But the main portion of the project and the portion of the project that residents will care about, all of our residents, whether you live in a multifamily unit, a single-family home, or you own a business in the township, all of our residents and businesses will receive a mailing. We're hoping that it will arrive by April 10th as our estimated timeline. So we are finalizing that draft, and we'll be looking to send that to print in the next 48 hours. So that's going to over 13,500 properties in the township, and it will inform all of the community on where they will find services. But generally speaking, nearly all of the township services that people need for walk-in service will be in the township hall room here, beginning April 24th when we move out of the municipal building. So we will have building and planning, public works, assessing, utility billing, and the treasurer's office here in this room. The lone exception would really be that the clerk's office will be in a temporary office space on Bennett Road, address of which will be provided in that mailing, but it's 2630 Bennett Road. It's on the north east corner of Hewlett and Bennett Traffic Circle. And then finally, just a reminder that parks will not be impacted. You can still visit the Parks Department at the Service Center. And that will be detailed in the letter as well. And then I'm going to pass over the CPF applications because we will touch on that later this evening. The Okemos Road Bridge Project, we are very hopeful that we will see southbound traffic returning to the bridge sometime tomorrow through Friday. So we are very confident that by the end of the week, the bridge will be reopened, and we will have communications going out to the community as soon as we are able to verify that the traffic controls and all the remaining work have occurred and southbound traffic is open. So we're very happy to see that coming to a close. And then we also have a RFP out for the 2024 local road program. So this is design, engineering, surveying, and inspections. So this is the first time that we have bidded out our design, engineering, and inspection services for the local road program. And bids are due in on Thursday, March 30th, at which point we will begin reviewing. And then last but not least, I just wanted to put out a special reminder for the community that the flashlight Easter egg hunt will be taking place on April 8th at Nancy Moore Park. So we encourage our residents to partake in that special event, and happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Officer. Trustee Hendrickson.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. On the subject of the chip and fog treatment and the 2021 and 2022 roads that were impacted, do we expect that that will have an impact on the 2023 local road program?
No, we already switched the preventative maintenance treatment.
I'm sorry, will that impact what we can do during the 2023 LRP?
Yeah, we're still crunching numbers, but generally speaking, if we were to do an overlay, a thin overlay of asphalt, which it gets complicated because the thinner you go, then you have to get into special mixes of asphalt, and then you get into more cost per ton. So it's a delicate balancing act. We also have curb and gutter roads. The ditch roads are easy because we can feather that driveway approach or any drives off of that road very easily on a ditch road. It gets difficult with the curb and gutter roads. So it's a balancing act in terms of depth of the asphalt that you can go with as it relates to those driveway approaches. So we're working through that, but generally speaking, a solution to this is going to fall in the $400,000 to $1 million range for overlays, depending on the depth that we go with, the mix that we go with, things like that. We have some more concrete numbers, but we really want to take Thursday, April 6th, the community meeting that we're going to hold as an opportunity to receive input and then kind of take that back and reevaluate our solutions that we have on paper and kind of look at that through the lens of the feedback that we get. The one thing that I will state is, we are a very environmentally conscious community, and this was stated in the letter that went out that you all have read. These are roads that are in good condition, and the chip and fog treatment still did have positive benefit, because really what destroys a road is water and sunlight, right? The Grand Canyon was carved by nothing more than gravity and water. Water is extremely destructive. So we have protected that underlying asphalt from the UV light and water, which is going to give it, that road now actually has a stable base. All the other roads in the township, when we take core samples, we find 2 to 2.5 inches of asphalt. So there was a lack of inspection on the original construction of the roads. I think when many of our subdivisions were built predominantly in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was a lack of inspection occurring at the road department. So we do grade inspections, so when we reconstruct these roads, we're having to go down to earth on the reconstruction portion, and we do a grade inspection before they start paving. So we know the depth from the bottom of, the bottom of the curb and gutter pan to the earth there, and so we're inspecting to make sure that we have 4 inches of asphalt. But we're also inspecting to make sure that our road builder is not trying to sell us excessive asphalt, because we have to stretch those lane miles, so it's a balancing act. So we have rigorous controls on that. But the road that's there, if we do a thin overlay, they will have a very good road product, because they have basically that old road that was in good condition, just acting as the foundation. All the other roads in the township have no foundation. I mean, they're, 2 to 2.5 inches of asphalt, when really the bare minimum should be 4, optimum would be 6.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board? Mr. Oxner? Thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you.
Item 7 on our agenda is board member reports of activities and announcements. Treasurer DeShane.
Thank you. Relatively quiet week. Did have a ZBA meeting last week and a CATA board meeting. I want to use my moment just to thank Brad Brogan and all the Friends of Historic Meridian. It's one of the Historical Village is one of the most shining examples of how our township residents come together, donate incredible amounts of time, energy, and money to enhance the township. I mean, you have staff over there, and they're not township staff. They are hired by the Friends and the foundation, and just makes a real impact. And hearing that 3,000 school children went through that pre-COVID is a real testament to that. So thank you very much for the work you do to enhance Meridian for all of the residents, and you make us a truly prime community.
Other board members? Clerk Guthrie.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. I too want to extend my gratitude to you for submitting the UNRWA Barn for Barn of the Year award and for asking me to speak on behalf of the township. I really appreciated the opportunity. Like I said at the annual conference, I think each of us probably has, if we think about it, a story from our ancestors or someone in our family that goes back to a barn in our history. And like I said at the conference, my family moved over from Sweden when they had a failed farm in Sweden, and the story goes on and on. I love barns, which is why I'm a member, so I'm super appreciative of this barn being recognized by the Michigan Barn Preservation Network. I got married at the Historical Village. I think I've probably said that 1,000 times, so I have a deep love for the village. So I appreciate all the work that you do and all the work that the members of the Meridian Historical Friends of Historical Meridian do for our community.
Pass the comments on to our board members.
Thank you. Last week, I attended my second year of the Clerks, Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks Institute. It's a 3-year program. So last week was my second year, and so next year will be my 3rd year. There were some good engagement opportunities during last week's institute that we didn't have the first year. So I really appreciated the opportunity we had to fight for a budget and state our case for things and work together in communications and stuff like that. So it was a really good engaging opportunity. So time well spent. I was surprised when I looked at the roster how many deputy clerks and assistants to clerks were there. There were very few clerks in the room, actually. I was probably one of a dozen. There was 100 people there, and most of them were deputies, so I was kind of surprised by that. So I appreciate the opportunity and being able to be there, and I look forward to next year.
Thank you. Trustee Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. We had a Community Resource Commission meeting on March 8th. We have some changes coming to that group and to our Human Services area. We also had a task force for the senior citizen group met, and we are beginning to formulate the activities, everything about how you start a project like this. Much of it is conceptual at this point, but we will be voting later on the CPF funding request that we are putting into Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin's office. So that's part of our planning because funding is the #1 thing there. Then trustee Hendrickson and I brought a concept to you 2 weeks ago about having a gun safety program here in the township. Well, we brainstormed that, and it is developed into a special event. And we met again yesterday. We're meeting every week. And so what we're planning to do is have a expo called Meridian Cares About You Health and Safety Expo. And it will incorporate all the safety issues and how formulated to be more of what you can do for your family to feel safe, what are your resources. And so gun safety will be one portion of that, but we have asked and have also received responses that have been confirmed as to who's going to be there. And there will be about 16 booths at this expo, which will be held on May 10th. That is a Wednesday, in the evening from 5 to 8 p.m. over at the marketplace at the Green. And it will be free. We are going to offer food. We are going to offer all of these agencies, Meridian Police will have a table, Meridian Fire, Meridian Cares, the Ingham County, many Ingham County offices of public health is coming. In fact, we have the public health director coming to do a keynote talk at this expo. We have Ingham County Emergency Management coming, MSU, Department of Public Safety. It has morphed into this wonderful collaborative event that we are so excited about. The advertising is going to be key to get the word out. And in conversations with Manager Walsh, he said, let's offer free food. So we thought that'll be a big draw. So please mark your calendars for this event. You'll start to see the advertising coming out next week on it. And I'm really thrilled to be able to bring these resources to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Hendrickson.
Madam Supervisor.
That's awesome.
And thank you, Trustee Wilson, for laying out the hard work that's already been put into that event. I'll also note, just to add to that this is an event that we are doing in partnership with the Okemos Public Schools and the Hazlet Public Schools. They've been terrific partners on getting the initial planning stages up and running. And we'll be working with them to get the word out through their means as well to the students and families in those communities. So I'm also very excited for where this event is going, and I think we're going to have a terrific turnout.
Thank you. Others? Trustee Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. Just one, actually, our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Work Group is focusing, we mentioned this last meeting, but focusing on our first Pride celebration here in Meridian, August 26th of this summer. And we're moving forward. We've identified a project manager. That would be Mr. Shorkey that works in our community development department. And we're moving forward with developing outreach for our businesses as well as other volunteers that may be interested, as well as participants. So we're moving forward on that. We're really excited. If I missed anything, Supervisor Jackson, I'm sure could pick that up. Other than that, Supervisor Jackson and I did attend a very small local St. Patrick's Day parade on Van Natta and Ty Hart Road. It was there was a bagpiper there that played the entire time. The police department was there to make sure we were safe, and it was really exciting. And it was the first annual. I believe it's going to be annual. That's my report.
Thank you. Anyone else? I would only add that, among other things, I attended the CIA, which is, I've forgotten what it stands for.
Corridor Improvement.
Corridor Improvement Authority meeting last Thursday, and they were, for the first time, armed with the authority to create a TIF for improving the infrastructure, generally conditions along Michigan Avenue corridor. And so I was rather excited about that and the enthusiasm of the members at that meeting for this new capacity. Next on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Mr. DeShane.
I move for approval of the agenda as presented.
There's
Support.
support by trustee Wazinski. All in favor of the approval of the agenda as written, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Chair votes yes, and I presume the motion passes. Item 9 is the consent agenda. Tonight, the consent agenda includes the communications, minutes from the March 7 regular Township Board meeting, and the manager's bills. Mr. Hendrickson.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. I move the consent agenda, and I will ask for one amendment to our minutes from March 7th. On page 7, under item C, we were discussing the recommendations of the Local Officers Compensation Commission, and I had asked that the meeting minutes be posted on the website, and it reads, at the moment, posted in the municipal buildings vestibule, which I don't need, just want them on the website, which thankfully they are now. So thank you to Director Tehoff for making sure that got done. So move the consent agenda with that one amendment to the minutes.
Okay.
Support.
And so first we should vote,
The whole thing is fine.
okay. All right. Mr. Lemaster?
Supervisor Jackson,
Yes.
Clerk Guthrie,
Yes.
Treasurer DeShane,
Yes.
Trustee Hendrickson,
Yes.
Trustee Sundland,
Yes.
Trustee Wilson,
Yes.
Trustee Wazinski.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
Thank you. Then item 10 is questions for the attorney. We have none tonight. We have no public hearings for item 11. And we move now to item 12, our action items. The first action item for tonight has to do with Okemos Schools delegation of authority for building permitting and inspections. Director Schmidt
I am much slower than this.
will explain all of that to us for our consideration.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. So the request in front of you this evening, you discussed at the March 7th meeting. This is an opportunity for the Meridian Township Building Department to handle the building planning, or the building plan review and inspections for the construction work that will be done under the Okemos Schools bond that was recently passed. Typically, schools go through the state of Michigan, Bureau of Construction Codes. There is a provision that allows them to request delegation of authority to the local municipality if there is a local authority that can handle it. In this case, we are qualified to do it. We estimate that it'll bring in approximately $788,000 in building permit revenue over the next 5 to 6 years. If we do it, it's zero if we don't do it. And we are confident that we can handle this within our existing workload. So staff would recommend approval of this to authorize the township manager to sign the agreement when he gets back from vacation.
Thank you. Do I have a motion? Trustee Wazinski.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. Motion to authorize the township manager to sign and submit the request of the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs for delegation of school plan review and inspection authority for the Okemos School District to the Charter Township for Meridian Building Department.
Support.
Supported by Clerk Guthrie. Trustee Wazinski.
Sure. As we discussed last meeting, it just seems we have the capacity. It makes sense financially. Also, I think that it would increase the efficacy based on the response time. It wouldn't put on hold at the state level. It's going to take a little bit longer to get inspectors out there. So it just makes sense. We're glad you have the capacity, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Clerk Guthrie. Further comments?
No further comments. I agree with trustee Wazinski. Thank you.
I think I would just like to note that this is a contract that involves the state giving you, Meridian Township and the school system to enter into this agreement.
So what it is that we will request, functionally requesting a waiver is what it boils down to. We're requesting Laura, Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, Bureau of Construction, delegates the authority for plan review and inspection to us for the school district. So there's no, the school district and the township jointly make the request.
Right. Okay, thank you. Anything else? Then, Mr. Lemaster, we have a motion. Could we get a roll call vote?
Clerk Guthrie,
Yes.
Treasurer DeShane,
Yes.
Trustee Hendrickson,
Yes.
Trustee Sundland,
Yes.
Trustee Wilson,
Yes.
Trustee Wazinski,
Yes.
Supervisor Jackson.
Yes,
Motion carried 7-0.
thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you. Item 12B has to do with the resolution in support of the fiscal year 2024 CPF application for the Village of Okemos. Mr. Ostermer.
Yes, good evening Supervisor Jackson and board members. So I'll be brief, and I'll also kind of speak to your upcoming 12C as well. I'm not going to get into too much detail tonight because this application is under consideration from Rep. Slotkin and her team. But just to give you a quick overview of the CPF program, this is year 3 of the CPF program. It's really in its infancy as far as a grant program goes. It is very unique as far as grant application programs go. The Natural Resource Trust Fund is very rigid. There's scoring and very rigid criteria that are followed. This is much more community-based, and one of the big factors with this application is the community support that you have behind your project. So we spent a great deal of time investing in that. There was a twofold process. One was the one-pager initial application. Rep. Slotkin's team selected 20 applications to move on to the final application round. We have 2 of those. So we had 10% of the finalist applications. 15 will be awarded. Due to the very tight turnaround for this grant program, we did not learn until Wednesday morning that both of ours had actually passed the initial round, and so we had less than a week to prepare for the noon submission today. But her staff did say that the board, since you have not had an opportunity to adopt a resolution, they would accept these signed resolutions tomorrow. So I will look to work with Clerk Guthrie after you approve these in support of both of our applications, one for the Village of Okemos and one for the Senior and Community Center, and we will transmit those over along with our other community support. And of course, the board has access to those full applications, so you can take a look at the good work that's gone on behind the scenes. Director Clark put a ton of work into hers, and we've made a concerted effort many months ago to make sure that we're approaching this in a much more diligent manner. And the same would apply to the state's program, which is kind of similar to the CPF program at the federal level. It's really very open-ended, and it's more about garnering the support of your state lawmakers, which we do have the support of all 3 of our state lawmakers. And we are pursuing funding at the state level for the Senior and Community Center as well. That's why the Village of Okemos application is really our top priority with the CPF program. And we feel very good about the position we're in, having 2 applications amongst the finalist group. Thank you.
Thank you. Treasurer DeShane.
I move to adopt the resolution in support of the fiscal year 2024 CPF application for the Village of Okemos project.
Support.
Supported by Clerk Guthrie. Mr. DeShane.
This is great news. I appreciate the excellent staff work to get this in, turned around, and it's very good news that we're one of 15 out of 20 finalists that are on the short list for this. It would be good if we knew more about this project, if they've been willing to meet with us on March 1st. We're talking about gap funding here, but what is that gap funding? Lots of questions here. Maybe this is the Hail Mary pass this project needs to be saved. I don't know, but this certainly can't hurt. But again, I know it took a lot of staff time to get this together. Thank you for that.
And Clerk Guthrie.
I echo the treasurer's comments and if passed by the board tonight, I will get this to Slotkin's staff as soon as possible. A signed resolution as soon as possible.
Now, we can pass it. Oh, I'm sorry, Trustee Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. I appreciate the staff's work as well in getting both this, the resolution in front of us, as well as the original applications to Representative Slotkin's office. It can't be said that this community hasn't done everything that it, absolutely everything that it can to see that the Village of Okemos project is successful. This being just the latest of myriad of things that the township has done to try to make this development happen. And so it's certainly in everyone's best interest to see it go forward. It's our hope that that should this CPF application be approved and the funding be provided, that this is, as the treasurer pointed out, the gap that needs filling to get this project off the ground.
Other members of the board. All right, we can pass this resolution by voice vote. All in favor of a resolution in support of the application for the Village of Okemos, please say yes.
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 Opposed, no. Chair votes yes, and the motion passes. And then, Trustee Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. I move to adopt the resolution in support of the fiscal year 2024 CPF application for the Meridian Township Senior and Community Center.
Support.
Supported by Trustee Hendrickson. Trustee Wilson?
Well, as chair of the task force that is doing the preliminary work on this senior and community center, I'm really thrilled that we're getting this application in, and I'm going to hope we're going to get both of them, because I understand the priority of Village of Okemos, but this is something that we've dreamt of for a long time, is to have a center centrally located in this community that is available to our seniors and also to all members of the community, no matter who you are, all residents. And we have great dreams of what we can bring to fruition, and certainly getting this award would go a long way to giving us the seed money to get this off the ground.
And Trustee Hendrickson.
Yes, thank you. This is something that is on one of our top 3 goals for this year, is to determine the feasibility of a senior and community center here in Meridian Township. This application, as well as the state application, as well as a number of other options, are being discussed in terms of how we can make this come to be. And our dreams can be as big as our pocketbook is in this case. And so some help from the federal government and from the state government would go a long way to making more of what our residents want possible.
All right. Anyone else? Then the resolution is in support of a CPF application for Meridian Township Senior and Community Center. All in favor of the motion, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. The chair votes yes, and the motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Opsimer. Item 13 on our agenda is discussion items. We have 3 tonight. The first 2 will be presented to us by Finance Director Amanda Garber. Thank you, I'm sorry. And it is the purchasing policy update. Ms. Garber.
Thank you. To improve efficiencies related to the approval and payment of small purchases less than $1,000, we're recommending that the board adopt an updated purchasing policy. This updated policy will assist the township staff in approving and processing payments for these small purchases that are less than $1,000 in a more efficient manner. Currently, the purchases that are less than $1,000 have to go through the purchase order process, as the larger ones do. And based on feedback we received from multiple departments, as well as working on going through a paperless accounts payable process, we believe that the approval and payment process for these smaller purchases could be more efficient. So we're recommending to update this policy to put it more in line with kind of like our credit card policy, where you can purchase items less than $1,000 with credit card. This way you can just purchase items less than $1,000 and send an invoice through the accounts payable process. Happy to answer any questions.
Board members, do you have questions or comments about the proposed change in the policy? Trustee Wazinski.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. Thank you, Director Garber. In reviewing, it does look like this is certainly a more efficient process. Purchase orders can be cumbersome. So I certainly support this. I have a couple questions. So it looks like your proposal takes away one piece, which would be an approval prior to purchase. So can you talk about that and how you feel that you're comfortable with that recommendation?
Yeah, so we're comfortable with it because right now, if somebody is an authorized user of a credit card, they could just go out and purchase those items with a credit card. If they chose not to do that, they would have to come and ask for prior approval through the purchase order and then go and purchase those items and bring the invoice back to go through the accounts payable process. So the fact that they can do that right now using a credit card makes us more comfortable with eliminating that.
Would the eligible, because I believe I remember that you have to be approved to have a credit card.
Correct.
Would it be a similar situation where you'd have to be approved to make purchases prior to purchase, or would this be allowable to any staff?
This would be allowable to any staff.
Okay, it's helpful, thank you.
Yep.
Trustee Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. As I recall, last year, you reduced the number of credit cards that were issued, and pretty significantly from what I understand. And also they have different limits, don't they?
Yeah, it's generally based on the position that the employee holds.
So that gives you some safeguards as to what someone could do with the use of that credit card plus your monthly reconciliations. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Trustee Hendrickson.
Yeah, this, I certainly appreciate the interest in cutting down on the bureaucracy involved in making a purchase. This policy change gave me some pause because as of right now, basically what you're saying is anyone with a P card could go about this process as we're redesigning it. But to Trustee Wazinski's point, we're now expanding the universe of people who can make these purchases without prior authorization to anyone. And that has me a bit concerned. I would like to see some kind of approval process for a purchase before the purchase is made, even if it doesn't have to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different steps. Or restrict the number of people who can make purchases under this policy to a smaller subset of people, department heads or supervisors or something to that effect. You know, it's a system that is based on trust, certainly, but you know, part of our role is to make sure that we're putting in place policies that do not facilitate bad behavior. And coming with, approval process after the fact, right, when something is delivered and an invoice is received, may not provide, it may be too late in some cases. And so I would be a little more concerned about making sure that there's some kind of either restrictive group to who can make a purchase or approval process for a purchase beforehand, even if it's less cumbersome than going through the supervisor, department director, accounts payable, accounting, and finance director. I agree, 5 hops is a lot. But if we are restricting, why not give everyone a P card? if this is what the policy is going to be, right? If we're saying that anyone can make a purchase up to $1,000, why wouldn't every employee have a P card? There's a reason for that. And so I'd ask that we be a little more deliberative in terms of, that approval process beforehand, or the group that's involved in being able to make purchases.
Okay.
Clerk Guthrie.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. First, I want to thank Director Garber for your work on this. The purchasing order process that staff currently has to undergo is cumbersome. There's a lot of extra steps that are not necessary. Staff has to sign a personnel policy agreement that they're going to follow the policies of the township, including the financial policies. And so I know from staffing perspective as a director of the clerk's office, how much more time it takes for all these all these items that we're purchasing. And it is not an efficient use of our staff time. And we know we have to have these items to do elections, and we know we have to purchase these items. The board has approved staff to purchase these items in our annual budget. We've all signed an agreement, a use agreement, for the way in which we're using our credit card, the way in which we're following the finance procedures. There's no need to create extra steps on the back end of staff and put more burdens on staff to have to conduct work, get work done, service the public than what is already there. So I as one of the staff members, is, could dual role here, appreciate cutting down on the bureaucracy that Trustee Hendrickson mentioned and getting things done in a more efficient manner. So I appreciate your time putting this together.
Thank you.
Treasurer Deshane.
I want to reiterate the clerk's comments, appreciate this more efficient process. I'm assuming you didn't make this policy up out of whole cloth. Did you see it in other organizations you had worked for, or see it as an auditor? What was the source of the framework for this change?
I mean, a lot of it's been feedback that I've received since I've arrived here. And in previous positions I've held in as an auditor, there are a lot of entities out there that don't even have a purchase order system like we have here. In my previous community, we really only had them if a vendor requested it or if it was a larger purchase, not for these really small items.
I appreciate Trustee Hendrickson's concern about any employee making any kind of purchase. At the same time, I would say that any employee here is accountable for their actions. And it's very unlikely that an employee would make a random unauthorized purchase without speaking with their manager first or face repercussions of that in terms of the termination of their employment if it were that egregious of an action. So those kind of controls already exist within the township. There's not free spending. In my experience, it's really only department heads that are doing any kind of significant purchasing, or at least authorizing that before anything goes forward. So I think we do have controls in place, and limiting this or raising this limit to $1,000 makes good sense to me. So thank you for the policy.
Trustee Buzinski.
Provoked my thought, Board. Thank you, Madam Supervisor. I would go back to Trustee Hendrickson's point. And Treasurer, you just said something too that spoke to me. So, I'm thinking like, well, we have a manager. Manager Walsh have to approve all of these little purchases. That can be cumbersome too. He's busy. Director Garber, that's a pretty high level. If we were to put in place just one level of pre-approval, could that come from their particular manager, right? So then we can put that onus on that manager, knowing that person went to the manager first. That's been approved as an approved purchase. Not to say that I don't trust staff or anything like that, but quite honestly, it puts a little bit of, takes a little liability off that staff as well. So you as a manager could pre-approve the purchase, and then, we'll go through the rest of the 5 steps. So I would support a very basic pre-approval process as well.
Clerk Guthrie?
It is my understanding, thank you, Madam Supervisor, it is my understanding that there is still an approval process. Number 4 in the second part says, the invoice goes through the accounts payable approval process. Supervisor, Department Director, Accounting, and Finance Director. So there's still an approval process. People aren't just willy-nilly going and purchasing.
I was
Is
talking
that
about a
correct?
pre-approval process. Sorry, out of turn.
No, I'm sorry. Am I
Yeah, so-
misunderstanding or?
The accounts payable process is usually after the fact. Once you have an invoice and the items have been delivered.
But there's usually an approval, like, people aren't just willy-nilly. What I'm saying is people aren't willy-nilly purchasing things. They're getting an approval they're getting direction from their director or from their manager, or the township board approves a budget. And we go by that guideline in the purchases that we make.
Correct.
Ms. Garber, we're talking about credit card purchases for items less than $1,000 or invoiced items. So a person making an employee making a purchase of less than $1,000 can either pay for it by credit card, or they can go through the invoice, requesting an invoice to make that purchase, which actually involves some pre-approval before the invoice is provided. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the option for an amount less than $1,000 is the purchaser's choice, whether or not to use the credit card or do the requesting an invoice and then purchasing the item, right?
Yes.
Okay. A couple of other points I'd like to make is, I believe it was at our last meeting, you provided us with an audit of credit card purchases. And were these standards kind of in place when those purchases were made and then audited?
So the new updated credit card policy was approved by the board in November. I think it was November 1st. And we did an audit of the November and December transactions with the credit cards.
And if I remember correctly, you found no abuse of the system. And there was only one suggestion of changing how the accounting was done. In that case, particularly in the motor pool. Is that correct?
Yeah, based on the transactions that were tested, we only selected a certain number of transactions. We found that they were all in accordance with our policy. And during the interviews that took place, there was one recommendation with motor pool, like small equipment, potentially having like an inventory list of those items.
Okay. So in the case for purchases less than $1,000 or less, and your prior audit, did you take from that the idea that this system works very well for your intended purposes of improving the compliance and the efficiency goals?
I guess I was just looking at consistency across our policies, because with the credit card policy, we have the ability under, I believe the wording in it was like emergency purchases under $1,000.
Okay.
So this, I was trying to make it consistent with that credit card policy.
Okay. So on that point, am in favor of the changes that you're proposing. I'm very comfortable with it, considering the processes you go through to permit credit card purchases by an employee for less than $1,000. But in addition to that, this document also talks about how we do purchases for $5,000 or greater, and $25,000, et cetera. And I find no difficulty with the plans you have put out. I would also note that, particularly with the credit card purchases, we get in our board packet every month an opportunity for oversight of how that system is working. And under those conditions, I am in complete support of what you're proposing here as a change in policy. Other comments? Mr. Hendrickson.
Yeah, I'm not trying to beat on this too much, because I really think that, what it is I'm asking for is not an onerous request. All I'm saying is, on this new procedure, step 0 is receive approval from your supervisor or department head to make a purchase. I think that's typical, act of your day job, is making sure that what it is you're going to do is done. I mean, let's just take for example, something incredibly simple, right? You have a staff meeting, you decide, we want to get Zach a birthday cake, okay? But it's unclear who it is that purchases the birthday cake, right? I can go out and, call Bacon Cakes and say, we want a cake for tomorrow, for Zach, invoice me at the township. Who knows if they'll even do it. But in the same meeting, Marna takes that it's her responsibility to go out and do that, and she does it. Right now, we've got 2 cakes coming, and the only time this is going to get caught is number 1, when both cakes arrive for Zach's birthday and we overindulge, and number 2, in the 5-step approval process to pay the invoice, at which point it will be too late. And so it seems to me a relatively simple thing would be for me to say, hey, Supervisor Jackson, we had this meeting. Am I authorized to go buy the cake? And you can tell me, no, Marna's already taken care of it. I feel like it's not too unreasonable to ask that we get 1-step approval prior to a purchase, which may be something that we aren't able to claw back after the fact with a 5-step approval process on the invoice side.
Okay, Mr. Duchesne.
I think you make an excellent point, Trustee Hendrickson. I think it's already baked into the process right now. An employee wouldn't be doing this. First of all, for your example, both Marna and the other cake orderer would be out of line because we can't purchase gifts for employees. So neither person would be paid.
All right.
Let's assume it's not a gift for an employee. Baked into the process that I think Director Garber is proposing is that no employee would do this without having their manager's approval. If you want like that made more explicit, I'm sure we could add that, but it's baked into the process now. Employees do not walk around making purchases without approval of their managers. In this building, and I doubt they do at your workplace or most workplaces,
right.
It just isn't allowed.
All right. Trustee,
Go ahead.
Mr. Absalom, you have a comment to add?
Yeah, just from my department's perspective, what I can tell you about, we would almost always use the credit card still. However, there's some vendors that are a little bit more old school and they don't use credit cards very often and they're just traditional, they're used to invoicing. So anytime we have a vendor like that, we have kind of a prior relationship with that vendor. It's usually someone that we've been working with for a number of years if they're invoicing us and we're not paying with a credit card for a purchase of this value. It's typically going to be a parts supplier or something like that for water and sewer, just to give an example. So these are going to be fairly rare in that instance alone. But to Treasurer Duchesne's point, every director is getting input or is signing off on the purchase before their staff is making it. I'll leave you all to that discussion and that decision as to whether or not it's put into this, but the vendors that we would actually utilize this for would be pretty select. So most vendors have transitioned to credit cards, and that's usually going to be the process.
Okay.
Oh, quick thing.
Trustee Wilson.
Director Garber, are you the sole arbiter of this policy? Did you write it and it's only your work, or were there others involved in putting together this policy?
This policy already existed, and I made some changes to it with others' input.
So there were others in your management team that had input into this?
It was mostly the finance department.
Okay.
And there was discussion at our directors' meetings about it.
In which meeting?
Our directors' meetings.
Okay. That's the point I wanted to get to, that Director Garber is not the decision maker on this, that there's been input from other management staff. And I get a little concerned about us wading into operations because I really believe that you know best and your team knows best how the functionality of your policies are. We're a policy-making body, but I don't want us to get into telling you how to operate and how to do your job. So that's my concern, and that's why I would support this change.
Other comments? One more thing, I appreciate, I've never seen this, how you handle surplus supplies and how do you get rid of stuff that you can't use. I've never seen it written down in the township before, and I appreciate seeing it. It's very clear and hopefully very easy to allow people to free up space and the like in the township. Further comments? Thank you. So this will come back to us for approval.
Yes.
Are we ready to make a decision at our next meeting?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item, oh, that's right, you're not going anywhere. The next item is 13B, travel policy update. Ms. Garber.
So this one came to my attention because we have it explicitly stated in our travel policy, our meal reimbursement rates, which don't match with our current practice. So that was the main reason for updating this policy. Since we were updating that portion, I just read through the entire policy and made a few other changes that include the elimination of cash advances for travel purposes, clarifying the meal reimbursement rates, because I've received multiple questions on if it's a per diem rate or if it's per meal. Clarification of receipt documentation that's to be provided to the township, including maps of travel routes and documentation of conferences with mileage reimbursement request, and the elimination of petty cash reimbursements for mileage reimbursements under $30.
Okay.
Happy to answer any questions.
Other questions or comments? Clerk Guthrie.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. I appreciate you looking through this document too, very thoroughly. I do have a couple of questions. On page 89, under officials business, it says that the township supervisor shall approve the reimbursable expenses for township board and commission members. Does that happen now? Like, I find that that the township supervisor does, no diss on you, Madam Supervisor, but I find it odd that, I mean, if you're in confrontation with the supervisor, maybe the supervisor is going to be like, I ain't approving you kind of thing. And, so I'm curious about that sentence. Maybe it's been there for a long time and we haven't noticed it, but I don't recall a township supervisor reimbursing approving reimbursable expenses for other board and commission members. Does that happen now?
Mr. DeShane?
That actually makes sense to me because we are a self-contained board. We have a supervisor, and it would make more sense for the supervisor to approve our expenses than the manager who actually works for us, and therefore is going to not be the best arbitrator of an expense. But the supervisor is one that the board, if you will, reports to, our elected leader.
Is that how it happens right now?
I can only say I've never done it.
Yeah, I believe the ones I've seen, it's the manager approving them.
That's what I thought too. I mean, I recently did a conference last week and I had to get pre-approval from the department manager, and other conferences Michelle works on with the board. Frank looks at, the township manager looks at those conferences and works on those with her, and they're in the budget, the board approves it in advance. So I found that curious, and I thought it should better reflect what we're actually doing. And if we do want the supervisor to do that, then we should be having the supervisor do it one way or the other.
The policy is proposing that we codify it so that the supervisor does it.
Yes.
Now, the question is, do you have a problem with that?
I don't. This is already here. So
There's no change.
There's no change in that. I'm saying if there's no change, we better make sure you
agree.
Sign off on those reimbursable expenses for boards and commissioners.
Right.
Just pointing that out. And then I had a few other, the reimbursable meal expenses. What page is that on? It's on page 90. So I'm very grateful for you changing this. These are very old numbers. And so I appreciate the update. And I'm wondering, when we do the mileage reimbursement rate, we follow the federal guideline and we adopt that every year. And I'm wondering why we don't do that with meal reimbursements so that we don't have to revisit this document every time. Because when I look at the standard rate for meal reimbursements, it's $59 for the day, not $51. It's $13 for breakfast, $15 for lunch, $26 for dinner. If you go according to different locations in the state, it varies. But if you do the standard rate that the federal government applies, those are the rates that are there. I mean, I recently was in Mount Pleasant. I had a salad, a simple salad for lunch, and it was $15. I can't even, $16 for lunch. I can't even give a tip to somebody. It was just a chicken salad, So I've always felt like the township's numbers were low for reimbursement for people who are attending conferences when they have to go purchase their own meals. And so I'm just wondering, I would like to not have to revisit this all the time. I would like it to keep up with the federal guidelines. So my comments, I guess, to the board were maybe look at, if we're doing that with mileage reimbursement, why not do that with meal reimbursement or the maximum per diem, which is $59 right now instead of $51. So those were those were all of my comments in regards to this policy, and I appreciated all of the other changes that you made, and I'm in agreement with those. And I also appreciate the changes in both documents reflecting DEI standards.
Other comments? Ms. Garber, is there a reason why one set of standards is used for mileage and another set of standards is And what is the source of the standard for meals?
You know, that's a great question. I had the same question because I would rather have general verbiage in here so I don't have to update it every time there's a change. So I'll look into that.
Okay. Trustee Wazinski.
Thank you, Madam. I would agree with that. I think over time and the way our, economy is running, it's going to fluctuate quite a bit. And I think it only makes sense to make it simple and follow the federal guidelines. I will make a note, though, based on federal guidelines, different cities have different rates.
Yes.
So, but that is clearly laid out under the, GSA for you and or staff. So I would support that change.
Is there also a state-based standard? That's different from the federal?
But it applies only to state employees, I believe.
But it could be used.
The GSA applies it nationwide, and they do a rate for each state. And some of the states, they do rates based off of which city it is, and then they do a standard rate for the state.
Okay. Other comments? Question? So I guess what we're asking for is a little more information about how we might evaluate that meal standard.
Okay.
And an agreement with the board, among the board, as to whether or not they want to have their expenses supervised by the supervisor, as is in our current policy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 13C is Mr. Director Schmitz. Do we need a break?
I'm just going to walk for a moment. I'll be back.
Okay, we'll give you a couple of minutes.
No, I just have to stretch.
Okay. Okay, so can we take 5 minutes?
Certainly.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor.
Order. Just beginning to start item 13C with Mr. Schmidt. This is our update on ordinance 2022-16, a sign ordinance. Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. Township Attorney Kushel and I are here this evening to go into as much detail as you'd like on the sign ordinance. What I'd like to do, if it pleases the board, I'd like to go over a sort of a high level, here are the highlights of this, rather than go section by section. Because I will start by saying that the majority of these changes, the vast majority of these changes fall into one of two categories. One, they're the changes to remove references to content, which is what is predicating this whole update. We can't specifically regulate a sign that is talking about a restaurant in an office district, which is something we have in our current ordinance. So it is either that change or it is a change to streamline and consolidate the ordinance. Previously, sign regulations were found in about 9 different spots. They are now found in 2. This ordinance and, unfortunately, still the medical marijuana ordinance. So we are most of the changes fall into those 2 categories. There are not many substantive changes to the actual function of the ordinance, but I want to go through a few of them briefly. So most of the beginning is the changes we talked about. We added a bunch of definitions because we really did need to add those definitions. And Township Attorney Kushel rightly beefed up our purpose section to make the ordinance more defensible. The first real major change that I want to discuss, section 16 of the ordinance is the professional office district. This is one of the first areas that actually has a physical change. And so 2 things happen here. One, the size of a freestanding sign goes from 25 to 32. 32 is functionally the standard, what we've established as the standard throughout the ordinance. So a freestanding sign, 32 square feet. You can pretty much count on that throughout the ordinance. This was the only one that was out of line. 25 is a weird number anyway, from a sign perspective. So 32 standard now throughout the ordinance. Wall sign goes from 20 to 30 square feet. We have another office request this month, the ZBA requesting a larger sign than is permitted. This is a fairly common request that we get. This will not address all of them because most of the variances we get are pretty large requests, but this is providing a little additional flexibility. And in doing so, we're also allowing multi-tenant buildings to have signs for each tenant. Now, as it currently stands, many of the buildings do that already. They just work around it in different ways. This just kind of clarifies how you do that when you have a multi-tenant building. So there are now standards in place for that. The next thing is under section 17, which gets into the commercial. So there's functionally 2 changes here. And the first one really revolves around the idea of having, if you have frontage onto a street, you can put a sign there. And the great example I will give you is the intersection of Grand River and Okemos Road. There are 4 corners. One of those buildings does not have signs on the sidewalls. One of those buildings does. One of those buildings got variances for the walls on the sidewall, and the 4th has actually a larger sign that would be permitted, but didn't need to get a variance for the other sign. So 4 corners, 4 different ways of handling it. This makes it very straightforward. If you have frontage, you can have a wall sign. The example on that intersection, the person that benefits on that intersection right now is Nothing But Cakes. They will now be allowed to have a sign, if this goes through, on the Okemos Road sign, consistent with the 3 other buildings that have signs on the sides. And again, it's based on, you have to have that frontage. The other change in the commercial district is the size of the freestanding sign. Again, this district currently has a sliding scale based on the size of the building, either 28, 38, or 43 square feet. This is at best unwieldy and at worst treats different buildings differently, and so we recommend just going straight to 38 square feet. If you want a comparison for that, that is roughly the size of the new oval that's installed on the township signs. If you put a box around that, it's right about 38 square feet. Give or take, quarter, depending on how you measure it. I do want to point out briefly, although it's really no different than how we currently handle it, we do have drive-through signage. They have their own section because that's not really an advertising sign, that's more of a function sign of how you're trying to make the site work. So that is one of the few things where it got a specific set of guidelines for it. We're going to flip ahead a little bit here and go to temporary signs because that's really the biggest change in the ordinance. And I will let Mr. Kushel discuss this further when you have the inevitable question. But essentially what this comes down to is we have split it between off-premise and on-premises sign. And they each have different standards. What we're trying to do here is get to regulations without saying what you're regulating. And that's very hard to do when you have things like for sale signs and political signs and grand opening signs. And so that's what this section is trying to get to. We have gone back and forth with this. We think we're in a good position here. It puts limitations in place, but none that are so burdensome that we should have a problem. It really is not going to change a whole lot of what happens now. People are still going to do what they do. But there will be now a lane for a business to put up a temporary sign legally. There will be a lane for people to put up political signs legally in the township. And then the last change that I really wanted to, no, I got two more, I'm sorry. The electronic message signs, I want to point out, section 23, that is actually not new. That exists in the commercial districts now. It just doesn't have any standards really for review. So what we've done is we actually provided standards for this request now. Previously it was up to the whims of the planning commission, which is, we need to give them some guardrails to make these decisions. And then the last thing I want to point out is section 26, which is brand new. It allows the board to grant what is functionally a waiver of some of the sign requirements during major construction projects. So when Grand River was under construction, the board would have been able to upfront say, okay, we're going to allow additional temporary signage for the businesses that are being impacted by this. Functionally, right now what happens is it's really a discretionary prosecution issue in terms of whether we address the signage issues along Grand River, which we tried to be as flexible as we could be last year, and we will continue to be flexible while it's under construction. But this would sort of make it clear that the board has the ability to tell us, hey, give them an additional 48 square feet while it's under construction, whatever that ends up being on a case-by-case basis. So that's really the highlights. Again, there's only, three substantive size changes. The two in the professional office and the one in the commercial. And the one in the commercial is really just consolidation to make everyone's life easier. But we'd be happy to discuss further any of the changes or any of the other changes. If there's something you've highlighted that you think is important that you want to talk about, this is a good time to do so while I have the brains behind this operation standing next to me.
Okay. Would anyone like to start us off?
I'll start.
Trustee Wazinski.
I want to start by saying thank you. I know this was a huge undertaking, and I remember the first day I met you, you're like, I got to work on signs, and that was several years ago. So.
That's all I've been doing for the last 24 months. Well, 48, because I did it for a couple of years before that.
So I appreciate that a lot. Also, being a member of the ZBA for the Zoning Board of Appeals for a little bit, many of our variances or waiver proposals were in respect with signs. So it was, in some cases, you could see where it was very cumbersome, but also not terribly logical. So I feel like you've addressed a lot of the logic that made it difficult as a ZBA member. I did have one question regarding the board allowing temporary signs, the new addition. I should probably know this, but how do you see that working? So would somebody come to your office, Director Schmidt, like propose, or how would that work? How would the board see that?
So I think what we would do is this would be a proactive thing from staff, working with Economic Development Director Clark. we've defined it as an infrastructure project or major redevelopment that has a direct impact on 5 or more businesses. So it's something big enough that the community is going to notice. We would then come to the board with a recommendation of, here's, we know this is going to happen for the next 4 months. We would recommend during those 4 months that they be permitted X. The example with the summer, if you looked around Grand River while it was under construction this year, there was a lot of different ways that businesses were trying to get their signage out there. And I think what we would try to do is standardize that a little bit. Obviously make it so that they're not blocking the road, they're not blocking visibility, they're not blocking sidewalks, things like that, but still try and give them additional visibility. Try to do it on a case-by-case basis.
So it would come through your office prior to coming to us?
Correct.
Excellent, thank you.
Trustee Wilson.
We have, just to reiterate what you first said, we have no controls for content. Is that correct?
We have done our level best to remove content-based regulations.
Okay. And my pet peeve is neon. Have we ever allowed neon? And I see it only in one location here, which it says neon is not permitted.
Yeah.
On page 103. Section 17.
Thank you.
First section.
15, 16, 17.
And it's what's allowed in C1, C2, C3.
Oh, okay. I believe that got moved. Let me double check real quick. It's in the strikeout under the purpose. It got moved to, so I have 2 copies of this going on.
It is in a strikeout section. It's page 103. Oh, 13? Page 13 in your document.
Section 17.
Correct. Well, somebody else can ask a question while I take a look.
I haven't found it.
Section 17 is on page
There.
109.
There it is.
He doesn't have the whole packet, so.
It's up on the screen right now.
Just page 13 for you.
13, yeah.
Page 13. And it says, strikeout section, it says neon signs shall be permitted, but it is struck.
Yeah, so what we've done is all the illumination standards have gone to section 22.
Okay.
And that is now subject to the review and approval of the department director for any illumination, be it neon, spotlighting, et cetera. Retaining the standards of not having flashing or moving illumination.
And also not.
Full shielding, not the source of the light not being visible from the property line, but neon would still, if it could meet the standards in the illumination, it would still be permitted.
Okay.
The question is, can they show us that it meets? And that's gonna be the sticky wicket, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Treasurer DeShane.
Regarding the electronic sign change ordinance, it reads only one change every 24 hours, and that can't be a scrolling message either. So it's a fixed message that can't be continuous, like a full list of things for sale that are scrolling through. It's got to be one message that stays put for 24 hours. Is that correct?
Correct.
So the current Walgreens electronic sign would be not approved today under this ordinance?
I mean, it wouldn't be approved for other reasons, actually, but yes.
Okay. This is meant to make it less of a safety hazard or of a motorist trying to read this scrolling message while they're trying to maintain control of their vehicle.
That is the impetus behind limiting the change.
Okay. Next section regarding murals, that we allow a mural on a commercial property can cover the entire side wall of a property.
That is, give me just a second, because I believe that is the exact language that's already in the ordinance. We just need to find the strike-through spot real fast.
Yeah. Subject 17.
Yeah, that is, yep, that is I believe it's the exact language that we just gave it its own section. Cover 100%, no other signage, maybe illuminated, yep.
And we can't control content, so what they call a mural could be a cigarette ad, but we can't say what we think is a mural and what's not a mural. So
No, because if you go back to the definitions prohibit the use of
Murals as ads.
business tools, advertising tools, like logos and
Okay.
product, and a mural.
But doesn't that seem to strike at the whole reason we're changing this, that we're trying to regulate what is content? And my concern is we're trying to define what a mural is, but my idea of a mural might be different than Attorney Crystal's view of a mural.
Yeah, and this is one of those areas where you get into a little more regulation, and the distinction isn't content. The distinction is commercial, non-commercial. So there is a certain type of content base there, because you're asking, am I just providing a beautiful scenery, or am I advertising something? There's some judgment of what the mural is trying to say. So in a sense, that's content-based. And that goes back to what the Supreme Court rulings that brought us to here today was, is that content, merely having to read the sign, is that going to be an invalid regulation? That was some of the initial thinking. Then the later development, there's another case out of the city of Austin that said, no, this kind of shorthand rule of if you read it, then it's content, we're not going to read it that strictly. So it does open up that avenue to say, I can look at the mural to judge whether it's a mosaic or a picture or a scene, or whether it's a cigarette ad or an ad for some kind of commercial purpose, without getting into a strict scrutiny content-based decision.
Okay. Regarding wall signs, we're maintaining the 1 square foot per signage per 1 foot of frontage currently in the ordinance. Is that correct?
Correct.
Multi-tenants, they have multi-tenants in the building. The same thing would apply. Let's say they've got 40 feet of frontage, so they get a 40 square foot sign. If there are 4 tenants, they each get 10 feet of that square foot, or do they get 10?
It's good 40.
Do they get
You get it based on your frontage. So if you have a 40 lineal foot building and it's got 10, 10, 10, each person gets 10, 10, 10. If I have 30 and you have 10, I get more than you because I have more space.
What if it's an office building, we'll say, and it has 4 tenants, and they all have a common entrance, and you can't tell who gets what from the curb?
They are going to have to show us that tenant has frontage in that direction. So if I lease the back part of the office, I don't get a sign on the front, because that's not my frontage. I'm on the back of the building.
Well, what if you've got a frontage on the level 1 and then more frontage on level 2? Which of the 2 tenants would get the square footage for that sign? Or does it double the amount of signage they get if they've got a multi-story building?
Well, there's a maximum though.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's still the maximum of 30 square feet, no matter what. So if you had 700 square feet, you still can only have that.
Okay, got it. And that same would apply for a freestanding sign as well, then. If they're going to get 32 square feet, there's 4 tenants, they're going to divide that 32 square feet up by the 4 of them.
Correct.
All right, those are my questions, thank you.
Trustee Hendrickson.
So the former Save the Whales sign restrictions, those fall under off-premises temporary signs, do they not?
Correct. The whales are not at my house, so I now am it's now an off-premise sign.
Okay. What is can you just walk me, maximum display time for a temporary sign is 60 days. If I have an issue with a sign, and I believe it's been up for more than 60 days, what do I do as a citizen?
Bring it to our attention,
Yeah.
and then functionally, we need to, at that point, be aware. Once we're aware of it, that's when we will start the clock, basically, if there's a problem. It is, to be clear, not an easy provision to enforce.
Yeah.
But it is, I think it is what is probably available to us. We had originally bantered about the idea of permitting temporary signs, which, while I appreciated it solved the back end problem, but the front end problem got substantially bigger for staff, especially come election time. So we flipped it back to making it an enforcement issue as opposed to an upfront permitting issue. You kind of have to pick one, and this is the lesser of two.
Okay. I think, we'll see where legislation goes, but it's possible that we find ourselves in a situation where our primary elections get moved from August to June. And so, presumably a candidate who wants their signs to be legally viable is going to hand them out in February with the, a proviso to, hey, put them up in, late March, early April, so they have 60 days within Meridian Township to be up. That same candidate, should they win, is likely not going to instruct their supporters to take their signs down, come mid-June and wait to put them back up until September. So we're looking at the very likely possibility that we're going to have political signs, even though we'll call them off-premises temporary signs, up throughout the township for the better part of 9 months.
That is going to be a problem, I think, that every community struggles with in the state if the primary election date moves, and we are probably going to have to relook at this. Like, one of the first things I said to the board when I brought this forward is expect us to be back with changes within a year, because on an ordinance this large, something is not going to work right. It's inevitable. I would be willing to bet if the primary date changes, this is the thing we bring back to change, because we're going to have to rethink it, because you're right, it's going to be an issue. We are not going to be alone, though, in that problem.
Yeah.
Also, on a completely separate matter, temporary signage for farm stands, which is section 19.
Yep.
How do I know that a sign is a farm stand sign?
That is language from the existing agricultural ordinance, and I want to say that comes from state law.
Yeah, there's a GAMP on farm stands, so that would be one thing we would look at. But essentially, well, it would be, there would be a farm stand, which would be, selling your apples or something, and I think that's going to be the easiest nexus to tell you whether or not something's a farm stand. Which again kind of goes back to the question about the mural. Like, yes, I'm sort of reading and interpreting the overall context of the sign, but I'm not reading it for its content, I'm reading it for its context. Is it next to a farm stand? Is it on premise? Is it off premise? It's going to be that sort of interpretive work. But if there's more work needed there, or if we think we need more definitions to flesh that out, we can certainly go to places in state law and the GAMPs to help beef that up.
Let me give one example real quick.
Yeah, sure.
So to that point, oftentimes when we have kind of a gray area, we did have one instance where a resident they took plywood and they made a rectangle, then they stapled or otherwise attached an American flag, an actual flag, to it. So they kind of turned a flag into a billboard. And the owner of this structure stated it's a flag. Well, according to any according to the sign ordinance, it was a sign or a billboard or however we wanted to interpret it. But oftentimes what we find is it's actually a neighborly dispute. That was obstructing something. My recollection's a little fuzzy on what it was obstructing or what it was attempting to, I think, or it was a message directed at a neighbor. So oftentimes when we get into these issues where someone's taking certain liberties in trying to fit into the ordinance in strange ways, it's really a neighborly dispute. So we always have to take a step back and just kind of look at the bigger picture and how neighbors are behaving toward one another and some of the intentions, and then we usually find a path forward. So just as kind of a broader concept here, there's always going to be neighborly disputes, and that's how a lot of this comes about. Or in the case of political candidates, oftentimes it's political candidates reporting on other political candidates, and oftentimes it's the right-of-way issue. Are you in the right-of-way or are you not? And typically once we get, just historically, once we start getting 2 to 4 political candidates complaining, we go clean the right-of-way. And everybody gets cleaned up equally. So to a degree, there becomes just a kind of a common sense element, and then there's the neighborly dispute buckets. So just food for thought. There's always a lot of discussions and deliberations internally about how we handle these in the most fair and practical manner.
Mr. Duchesne.
Excuse me.
Stay away from this side of the table.
Not coming down there.
Excuse me. The We Believe signs, they're really big in Meridian Township. We believe science is real. We believe Black Lives Matter. We believe be kind to all. I mean, they're really popular in Meridian Township, and they really reflect the values of that homeowner. They paid for that sign. They put it in a prominent place in the yard. Are they now going to be illegal once they're up the 61st day?
That's interesting.
The question is, how do we separate that from someone hanging an American flag from their front of their house?
So, it's interesting you bring that up because there's one in my neighborhood that I drive past almost every day, and that's part of my thinking in trying to get to this.
Until tomorrow afternoon.
We are going, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve with this, to be clear, because we are trying to address a large issue, and sometimes these smaller issues get caught up. And so one of the things I would point out is that very clearly could be interpreted as an on-premise sign, because you were speaking to the beliefs of the person, not of the whales. And under the on-premise provision, we did include the ability to allow these signs to be up longer than 60 days. There is the provision that allows that. And so I think what we're going to see is a lot of that for some of the signs like that, which are, functionally a statement of belief of the person there. Now, on the flip side, we're going to get that for other types of signs. I'm certain of it. Already having a couple in mind. But that's one of those things that we're just going to have to, this is something we're going to figure out as we go, because this is a complicated, big thing that we're trying to put in black and white on paper.
In boxes.
Okay.
Let's start with residential flags. Residential flags. No flagpole shall be installed without obtaining a building permit.
Functionally, if you're putting something on the ground with concrete, we really want a building permit on that. That's kind of a standard that we would say to any. We tell people even a temporary shed, if it's under 200 square feet, doesn't require a permit. With the caveat is if you're cementing it into the ground, you really need to get a permit.
Okay.
That's kind of the standard. If you're cementing something into the ground, you need to get a permit.
Okay. And a flagpole from a porch post is irrelevant.
Irrelevant.
Okay. I need to say that I find it a little ironic that in zoning, we're trying to get away from use-based zoning, but in signs, to get away from content, we're relying on use-based categorization. And I find it a little ironic, but you will appreciate, I'm sure, what I'm talking about. Let's talk about this business with no frontage on the street, but they face the rear of the building. Someplace in here we say no signs on the rear of the building in commercial
Correct.
spaces. So those people who's in a multi-tenant building get no signs for their rear facing, especially if that rear is not on the street. It can't be on the street. It doesn't matter if it's on the street.
Correct. If you do not have frontage, I mean, there's no, because you'd be taking up someone else's space to install a sign. And so I can't assign the rear tenant the space for a front tenant, because then the front tenant's got to give up the space. And so what happens is that's why you have provisions for both wall signs and freestanding signs. So if a tenant can't get a wall sign, there is still a freestanding sign available to them. And we allow the landlords to work that out.
Okay. Trustee Sundin.
Well, I was just wondering, what about if you have a business that you own both the front entrance and the back entrance, can you have a sign?
So a rear sign in a case like that, that's likely more of a directional sign than anything else, because you probably have like a deliveries only sign or something like that. We don't have a lot of businesses that I can think of in the township that have both a front and a rear entrance. Watershed off the top of my head.
I'm just kind of thinking of Frandor, and that's not Meridian.
Yeah, and what we may run into it is when our downtown projects start to happen and you start to have some of that depth of business, we may have to revisit that issue.
Okay.
Because that might be a scenario where a rear, I'm thinking myself in Hazlitt Village, you have a couple of commercial buildings in the front and you have most of the parking to the rear, as per the board's design. You may have a situation where they need to have a sign on the rear to make sure people know where they're at.
Right.
So that is something we may have to relook at in the near future.
Buddy's Pizza has that too. They wanted signs in the rear as well.
Yeah, they got a few variances, if I recall, and that's part of the reason was because they have the weird configuration in the parking lot.
Soroki's Chicken as well. They have signs on both sides. We made an exception for.
Oh, it was an MVPD, so they got their signs approved with.
Typically, the ZBA will make an exception when we have a double-facing building like Soroki's.
Okay.
Yeah,
so that they can actually get it approved. There's somewhere in there that
Sign
you get it
variance.
approved.
Yeah, and this may be one of the items that we have to take a closer look at going forward. If we start to see more of these, it's something that I'm generally of the opinion that the ZBA should only meet in rare circumstances. So like, if we start to see multiple things, we need to discuss changing the ordinance.
Okay. So I'm dying to ask this question. So the lady with the grocery cart.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, if it were working.
It is working now.
Is it working now?
It is.
And she's walking, right?
She is walking.
Okay, that's not movement? I mean,
That is a non-conforming sign that long predates.
Oh, it's, okay, okay, and she'll continue to be. Okay.
She's popular.
Okay. And the board has the authority to continue that.
That is a sign that is non-conforming, so as long as it is not damaged more than 50% of its value, or that the owner makes changes to it beyond 50%, then they can continue.
Okay. I don't find any, I'd like to see this without all the red. And can you guess how many pages this will be reduced to from 24?
You'll be surprised, it's not that much less. 16. Yeah, it only goes down to like 16.
It won't be?
It only goes down to 16, I believe.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Deborah.
All right, thank you.
The clerk got through.
That's okay. Thank you, Madam Supervisor. I have a couple comments and a few questions. First, Section 7, page 100, which is page 4 for you. I wanted to thank you for taking out the no exterior wall signs or freestanding signs inside Research Park District. I appreciate that being taken out. I don't even understand, I can't comprehend why it was in there, so I wanted to thank you for that. Section 11, I think the purpose is clearly defined, and so I appreciate the clear definition that's being described in there. Page 103, which is page 7 for you. Section 12, item 7. What was my question?
Change message.
When a business leaves, what is the requirement for them taking down the sign? I think that's what this section is referring to, or it's not referring to. I couldn't find it.
This is actually referring to when the next business comes in, right?
Right.
Yes, and I understand that, but my question is, what happens when the business leaves? Is there a requirement for their sign to be taken down, or does that sign just stay up until somebody comes in? Because I couldn't find it being addressed anywhere in the ordinance. I only found this being addressed.
Apologies, I'm not coming up with this off the top of my head, because in my previous job, we had this provision, and it was very controversial. We do not require that the sign is removed with the business, because the sign is technically still legal. And by removing it based on the business, you are removing it based on the content of the sign. So there is no requirement that they remove the panel should the business leave.
I would like to see proposed language when a telecommunication provider abandons a pole, they have to take the pole out. There's requirements for them to take their equipment. I think we should have the same kind of requirement when a business leaves. We shouldn't have a sign up there for 30 months saying that this business is here when really they're not.
This is a non-conforming sign.
That's it, non-conforming.
Yeah.
It's abandoned road.
Yeah.
So I would like to see some proposed language, whether it gets adopted or not. I would like to see what that looks like.
Happy to look into that.
Okay, thank you. Section 16, this page, I gotta step away here.
Before you move on, can I ask, why doesn't section 5 under 12 address Clerk Guthrie's question?
Right, because that section 12 is only on non-conforming signs. So if you have a non-conforming sign that then it becomes abandoned, then we are gonna make them remove it because it's a non-conformity.
Okay, thank you.
So if Playmakers goes out, they got 90 days to take the grocery cart lady down.
Right.
Really?
Seriously?
Yes.
That's an icon.
Wait a minute.
Historical significance.
So I think you have a couple things going on here. One, I think you would be surprised at how many signs of that era that still exist are non-conforming, first off. Which two then gets into prosecutorial discretion here and us working with the owners. The point of that section, and we got into this a lot in my previous job, of what is abandonment, right?
Right.
They would have to show us that there is no intent to continue to use that sign for a future user. It's not an automatic 90 days, it's down. They have to show abandonment, and we have to prove abandonment for that provision to then be triggered.
And doesn't that, isn't there a difference between the owner of the property? The sign, that particular sign belongs to the owner of the property, not to the tenant in the building.
Correct.
And so that's a different perspective you have to consider when you're talking about abandonment of the sign and discontinuation of the business. Right?
Correct. And to be frank, what I would suspect would happen in that case is if Playmakers were to, heaven forbid, ever go away, that building owner would immediately swap that panel out with a for lease and his phone number on it. Because that's what happens in a lot of cases to show that they are continuing to use the sign.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the sign doesn't refer to Playmakers anyway.
At that point, yes.
Okay. Any others?
Oh, no, I'm still.
Oh, you're still going, I'm sorry.
We love Playmakers.
I interrupted you.
It's okay.
I'm sorry.
I think I was going to page 108, section 16, which is page 12 for you. Why increase the size? I'm like having a hard time with my new glasses seeing everything, so I'm a little slow in asking these questions. Why increase the size from 20 to 30 square feet in item 1B and from 25 feet to 32 feet in item 2B?
So for 1B, we were trying to address some of the variances that we most commonly see.
Okay.
And so that there is a band of variances that would cover. It's not going to cover all of them because there's all the people that want a sign this big, and we're still down here. So that's covering a certain band of variances and trying to eliminate that incrementally
That was commonly asked.
without making a substantive, a huge change.
Okay.
The change in 2B is really for consistency's sake. This is the only district that didn't allow 32 square feet for a freestanding sign. And so we were trying to make that a fairly consistent standard throughout the ordinance, throughout districts. So developmentary signs.
Standardized it.
That standardizes that one, yeah.
Okay. And then also in item 2C, you went from 16 feet to 6 feet. If you could explain that.
Office tenants do not put up 16-foot tall signs. They're awkward and unwieldy. Office tenants put up 6-foot tall, nice, low signs that people can see.
Okay.
I think this was just a holdover from when this ordinance was originally drawn in '74.
And then I don't have any other questions. My only two other comments were, I appreciate section 26 with the construction waivers. And I also appreciate section 20 for temporary signs, cleaning that up, trying to explain this during election season, what our requirements are for political signs and all these different districts was very time consuming. I had to write out this huge thing and send it to tons of people all the time. So I appreciate the 60-day rule. We'll see how it plays out with 60 days, 15 days, 60 days. We'll see how all that plays out. It's going to be sign crazy next year. But thank you for your time and for the our attorney's time and for the Planning Commission. I know they spent a lot of time on this as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Other comments, questions? Mr. Duchesne?
One question about home-based businesses. Home-based businesses have their own ordinance, and they're really, home-based business should not be a visible business.
Correct.
So a sign wouldn't be permitted, and I don't believe it's addressed anywhere in here as well.
They are permitted a sign. It's 2 square feet.
Yes.
Which I believe is the standard currently in the ordinance. Let me double check. Yeah, home occupation currently allows one non-illuminated sign not to exceed 2 square feet,
And that's what it is.
and that's what it's proposed to be in the current ordinance.
What section is that in?
The new one is in section 2, which is going to be an amendment to an existing section. So it's right on the first to second page, of the clean version.
And then on the old language is in section 15, it's struck out.
Okay, thank you.
Clerk Guthrie?
I'm sorry, one final question I thought of when you were talking about the flags. I didn't see anything for garden flags, because I think that's what they talk about garden flags with those. Is there a separation between that and flags on the?
Still personal.
Garden flags are, they change a lot, and so we can't get everything. If somebody really wants to go, if someone out there goes crazy on garden flags, we will be back with some regulations. But right now, they get a free pass for garden flags.
And garden statues, don't forget those.
And so you'd have a square footage maximum. Yeah, we're already having fun thinking about that. So if it's an issue, yeah, we'll have.
Hey, at least I got you both laughing during the sign discussion.
There you go.
Dan's behind
Mr.
you.
Oxford?
Mind the legal bills, Clerk Guthrie.
Anything else? So it seems to me that we're ready for a clean copy, a consideration of a clean copy for,
We will see what we can work up on that one comment from Clerk Guthrie on the removal of signs when business leave. And provide that in the next packet along with the clean copy.
Thank you.
So what we're calling a sign, in this case, is not the structure for us, the faces, but the faces.
Yeah, so typically when we measure the size of a sign, the easiest way to describe it is we put a box, the smallest possible box around all words and graphics. Which is why, our sign may measure, in theory, 28 square feet, but to measure it under the way we do things is you put a box, so it's bigger. So which is why you typically always see square rectangular signs.
Okay. I think we're ready. I have one more thing to say.
Yes, ma'am.
I never thought you could do this. I think it's very cleverly done. I am in awe of how you do it, but it really involved just looking at it from a different perspective. Starting from a different perspective. And it's a beautiful thing.
Thank you very much. This was a fun project to work on.
Okay. we hope to see it again soon. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
His nose is growing.
We come to item 14 on our agenda, comments from the public. Are members of the public still here who would like to speak to the board at this point? Seeing none, other matters and board member comments is items 15. And we stand adjourned. Or do I need a motion? Okay, I need a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
All in favor of the motion made by Mr. DeShane and Trustee Wazinski, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Chair votes yes.
Excellent.
We are out.
Thanks.